I do think that obviously people who are religious can live under a secular system, and I think in fact it's the safest system as a minimum for people who are religious or not to be able to live. I think oftentimes secularism is promoted as the opposite end of Islamism, and I think that's just a blatant lie, as a way of pushing back secularism and promoting religion's role in the public space. The reality of the matter is that people, even if they are religious, they don't necessarily all agree with Khamenei or Qaradawi or the Pope. They have their own personal beliefs. Very often, actually, it's in conflict with the ruling elite and what's deemed to be the power sources in religion. Very often they challenge it and they're opposed to it. And so in that sense, I think that actually having a secular society where religion is kept out of the public space, out of the state, out of the educational system, out of the legal system, out of employment, this helps people, including those who are religious. Oftentimes they'll say, oh, this is because you're an atheist. And, if I look at it as an atheist, I want a lot more against religion than secularism. I think secularism is just a minimum. It's a minimum requirement. I mean, I think especially, as Fibers mentioned earlier, we're not talking about a theoretical issue. We watch day in and day out the murder and mayhem that religion is causing worldwide, in our streets, in our neighborhoods, in our cities, and in countries across the globe. And I think actually, in a sense, as the late Marxist and humanist Mansour Hikmat said, it's not about private and personal religion, it's about a religion industry. It's an industry, it's worse than the mafia. Khomeini issues a fatwa against a British citizen and he's free. And he's still part of the state, They threaten and they slaughter and they kill left and right and center, and they're not even very often prosecuted for it, So in that sense, I think the fight against religion has to be a lot stronger and a lot deeper than merely secularism. Secularism is a minimum. It's a minimum that I, as an atheist, I, as someone who is a religion phobe and an Islamophobe, I, as someone who makes the choice of defending people and people's rights and freedoms versus the right of religion to bulldoze over people and their freedoms day in and day out. But I do want to say, and this is something I strongly believe in, that there is a distinction between Islam and Islamism, and I think if we don't stress this distinction, we end up possibly alienating a lot of Muslims, a majority of Muslims who are the first victims of Islamism and at the forefront of fighting this movement in Iran, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in places where they are shot in the street for saying and doing what many of us don't dare to do here in the West. And I agree with Maria that this is all religions, but Islam is different only because, not because it's better than the Bible or the Torah, the Quran, for example. The misogyny in all of them is, incredible. I think if we don't stress the fact that Islamism, that uses Islam as its banner, has political power, I think we fail to see the problem at hand. It's like, speaking about various religions, when you live in the Spanish Inquisition, you need to deal with the Spanish Inquisition first. And I think if we don't focus on Islamism as a political movement, we fail to address the point. It's not first and foremost an ideological battle, though I think all free citizens should fight against superstition and religion whenever they can. But it's first and foremost a political battle. We need to push Islamism back. And in order to do that, one of the main minimums that we have to adhere to is to defend secularism. We have to have it, and we can't compromise. I think the problem is that even secularists, And I include men and women in this. I think this is a battle of both men and women. There are men who are the greatest allies of women's rights, and women who are the greatest misogynists, including many in the Islamic parliament in Iran, parliament, majlis, whatever. And so, so I think this is a fight that we need to be aggressive about. I know, it's a dirty word now to call yourself an aggressive secularist, but I think that's the minimum that we can call ourselves if we believe in equality and in women's rights and in human rights. I want to just talk about a couple of points that really bugs me in the discussion on secularism, because there's too much to talk about and I don't want to go over my time because I get told off. But one is the issue of neutrality that we often hear about. Yes, a secular state is supposed to be neutral, and in France, I think a better explanation is incompetent on the issues of religion. But I find oftentimes that, secularists use the concept of neutrality as a way of promoting religion's role in the public space, Oh, we're neutral, so we've got 5,000 Church of England schools, so we need some Islamic schools as well. We've got to be neutral. That's not neutrality. That's not neutrality. And because the state is meant to be neutral, that means that the government needs to be quiet about children being beaten in Islamic schools and women being denied their right to divorce, to marriage, to child custody in Sharia courts, because the state is meant to be neutral. That's not what neutrality means. It means that the state doesn't get involved with religion. Religion isn't supposed to be part of the state, but the state has a duty to protect people from religion's encroachment, from its using courts and using schools in order to violate and abuse large segments of the population, both here and everywhere. The other issue that really bugs me is the question of it being voluntary. If I get a penny for every person who tells me that it's okay to have Sharia courts as long as it's voluntary, I would be a millionaire and most probably would be in the Maldives right now, which I'm dying to go to but can never afford. But, and I guess my question to them is, well, why don't we wait and see if a woman voluntarily wants to be beaten up before we say that it's wrong? Maybe she likes to be beaten up. And what about the child? Shouldn't we wait for the child to say that she doesn't want to be sexually abused before you intervene and say children shouldn't be sexually abused? And I guess my question is, stop hiding behind the issue of voluntary. Stop hiding behind it and allowing misogyny and child violence to take place day in and day out in our neighborhoods and in our cities against our citizens in order so that you can stay silent about a scandal that is taking place, not only in this country, but across the world, a human rights scandal, and one that hiding behind the issue of voluntary just won't cut it. The final thing is the issue of scrutiny. The numbers of press releases we see from progressive organizations and secularist organizations that demand scrutiny on faith schools and scrutiny on Sharia courts while they are legislating misogyny and child abuse day in and day out is outrageous. Scrutiny, is that all that you can come up with in this scandalous situation that we're faced with? Scrutiny? Do you want the faith school that was covered, the Islamic school that was covered in a dispatches program was given an outstanding certificate from Ofsted. But obviously they'll pretend they're very nice when you come and visit them. I mean, it's not rocket science, So scrutiny, no, I'm sorry, don't just limit people's rights violations to the need for scrutiny. You need to get rid of them. Get rid of Sharia courts. Get rid of faith schools. Get rid of religion as being the only characteristic that defines millions of people when they have so many characteristics that define them. And stop handing over people lock, stock and barrel to Islamism. The fight for secularism is a fight against Islamism and in defense of people's rights. And one final thing that I want to say is that the battle for secularism actually is an important one in pushing back the far right as well. The far right is not here because they defend secularism. They love religion's role in society as long as it's their own religion. And they're very similar to Islamism. Why is the far right rising? Because Islamism is rising and they feed off each other and they need each other because they're one and the same. And so in a sense, the demand for secularism will not only help to defend people's rights, but it would also help to push back the far right and defend 21st century humanity and values. Thank you. On the issue of moderate Muslims, I mean, I also disagree with you and agree with Geeta. I mean, I think that, I think in my opinion, a vast majority of Muslims are what is being called moderate Muslim, and I hate the term because, again, it just defines people by their religion. And that's why I think it is important to make a distinction between Islamism and, people's beliefs. I think what happens is, if you've got Islamic states and you've got an Islamic movement that is, look, it threatens people, in Britain, let alone what it does to people in Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan. The numbers of people who've come up to me who want their names removed from the No Sharia petition because they're afraid, because their city and their name is mentioned on the petition. It causes fear, and it runs and rules by terror and intimidation. In countries where it has power, it throws acid in the faces of women if they're not properly veiled. And I mean, for goodness sakes, it still digs ditches and stones people to death in the 21st century. So when you're looking at that concept, the whole idea of moderate Muslim, it just loses its meaning in the sense because you've got to focus on Islamism. Yes, there hasn't been an enlightenment as there has been against Christianity, but that's what we're trying to organize. We need an enlightenment against Islamism. And that's why I keep saying we're living under an Islamic Inquisition. Don't treat it like you would other religions. And going back to you, I mean, I agree with the panelists that religions are fundamentally the same. There's a distinction with Islam because of that political power. If you want Islam to be cuddly, I always say, well, push it out of the public space. And then you have people, the wonderful church giving out soup at soup kitchens and suddenly being wonderful and cuddly, and then, but that religion, Christianity, was not so cuddly during the Spanish Inquisition. It's done very much the same as Islam is doing today. And I think that's where we need to make the distinction. You want a cuddlier Islam, like you think Christianity is cuddly, push it out of the public space. Defend secularism, because that's the only way we're going to manage. In my opinion, a cuddly religion, a better religion, is one that has its back to the wall, and it can't move, and that's why it seems nicer. And finally, just one thing about secularism, as Annie as well said, you can't say, China's secularism, well, it's a dictatorship. Well, obviously, you also have to look at the other things. I mean, I think what happens is, in an attack on secularism, secularism is blamed for every ill in the world. Well, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work, logically or otherwise. Thank you.
Philip, thank you, Maryam.